بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. On Mondays we cover our series The Forgotten Blessings, and I wanted to speak about really something that's very, very practical for us in our current situation, and something that a lot of people are struggling with. Now, what's unique about struggles is generally there are struggles that are specific to a certain group or a certain age. So for example, parents will complain about children having a specific struggle that they are facing in their house. Teenagers, their struggles are different. Younger kids, their struggles are different. Older college kids, their struggles are different. From the aspect of the younger generation, they'll complain about certain things that they see is going on in their family, with their parents, etc. What's unique about this particular issue is that this particular issue is universal. It applies to all people of all ages, of all backgrounds, and it actually applies even to people that are not just in our city or in our country. As a matter of fact, every country, or the most part of the world at least, is struggling with this problem. And that's why I titled this session The Human Touch, or Losing the Human Touch. And that is really something that we have forgotten for a long time, and something that slowly we are turning away from, which is the beauty and the ni'mah, or the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He has given us in the form of the human touch itself. There's something quite profound about the way we interact physically with one another. A lot of those things have now been cut off from us. And really because we've been, due to social distancing, due to quarantine, we're kind of, the idea of shaking hands, the idea of hugging someone, the idea of just being in their presence, the idea of doing a physical activity with another person has, for the most part, it's vanished from our daily schedules, our weekly schedules, or whatnot. Now, the question comes then, how are we spending our time? And actually, we're not spending our time, for a lot of us, we're not spending our time any differently than we were before this crisis, right? And that's the idea of us and our time with technology, our time on our screens, our time on our phones, on our tablets, on our TVs, on our computers, whatever it is, that time that we're spending there, now that we think we're spending there due to social distancing, we've actually been doing it for quite a while, right? Over the years, our usage of technology has increased, and there are great benefits that come with that. But at the same time, there are some weaknesses that come along with that as well. And one of those is this idea of an over-reliance on our phones, on our screens, right? Everything from the news that we used to get through newspapers, food that we used to cook ourselves or that we used to go out. Now we want to order in. Now with Amazon and with all these delivery services, we want to try and order from online instead of actually going in, right? With mobile banking, instead of actually going into our bank, we simply, we have, the check is directly deposited, or we just scan it. We just check our balance from there, with Zelle and all these money services, we send money back and forth, with really not making any physical contact, right? And for a long time, we've become used to that, and we've made ourselves accustomed to it. And some of these things are necessary, but there's also an element that we need to examine on my usage of technology, my usage of my smartphone. How much of that is necessary? How much of that do I really need for my work, for my school, for whatever else it is, for essential contact? And how much of it is time that I really do not need to be spending, right? And, this is something that, now with new apps, new apps on our phones and stuff, you can actually check your screen time. You can see how much time did I spend on a particular app throughout the day? How much time did I spend on my phone, right? And really there are astonishing numbers. I mean, I'd encourage everyone to go home and to check up and see how much time do I spend on my tablet? How much time do I spend on my phone? And on which app do I spend most of the time, right? Now, this is something that I encourage my fellow, brothers and sisters from the community, regardless of whether you are parents, regardless of whether you are grandparents. This is something that we kind of target, and we always blame the younger generation, right? The kids, we always blame them, that our kids won't leave the screens, and we want to take away their phones and their tablets. But really, this is something that's crept into the elderly of our society as well, right? Regardless of whether you're a parent or you're older than you're a grandparent now, these something that we all are struggling with, and I myself am, in this with everyone. And so this is something that we really need to first of all understand. We need to understand the power of technology, and we need to understand what comes with it. We need to understand what are the harms of excessive screen time. And don't take it from me. The experts and the people in the tech industry, the people sitting in Silicon Valley, all of the people behind some of the great tech projects, if you listen to their statements and what they state about screen time and technology usage for kids and for adults as well, you'll see that there are great possible harms that can come out of it as well if they are not used proportionately. One of those is the idea of us being socially dysfunctional. The idea of us lacking, we can't hold conversations anymore, right? We can't sit for 5 or 10 minutes without pulling out our phone, right? So we can no longer carry a conversation. We can no longer just sit with people and put away our phones, right? Whether we're eating, whatever it is, we're always on our phones. We're taking pictures, and even now, so people say, imagine life before the tech era. Imagine 100 years ago or 200 years ago when people never had smartphones, they never had the internet, right? But the reality is that people didn't have these things, but they made up for it, doing so many other things, and they kept themselves engaged. Now, up till now, you might think that this doesn't really have anything to do with Islam, right? This is a social concept, it's a social opinion. But actually, the very ibadat, the very rituals that Islam puts forth, a lot of those have very, very strong connections to the physical interaction of us with one another at a family level and then at a communal level as well. The way we pray, standing next to one another in a single line, shoulder to shoulder, right? The way we greet one another, shaking one another's hands, right? Even things that we no longer really do. The idea of sighting the moon, right? Sighting the moon now, it's become more of a, the moment we think of that, we think of all the controversies around sighting the moon, right? Do we follow global or local or whatever it is, right? That comes to our mind first. But really, for the most part, Muslims throughout the history, there was a tradition of going out to see the moon, right? You'd go with your kids, you'd go with your family, you'd go with your community, you'd go there at Asr time, you'd pray Asr there, you'd stay later on till Maghrib, and then you'd pray during that time you'd look for it, you'd pray your Maghrib there, you'd have some food with you, and it would be an experience of interacting with Allah's creation around us, right? Similarly for the prayer times, this is something on the daily. Before we had clocks, before we had watches, before we had our calendars that are calculated for us, we had the idea of simply observing the sun, right? Because the salah times, the prayer times, they all have to do with the positioning of the sun in the sky, right? So when does Fajr happen, right? And then Dhuhr with the, when the sun passes its zenith, and then Asr, and then Maghrib. Throughout the day, you're monitoring the sun. So it's a physical activity that you are doing. And so Hajj is the same way, right? Hajj is, you have to travel, there's physical activity involved. Fasting also, it's very physical. So these are things that in a world of, especially us now, in our homes, one of the very, very dangerous things that we can do to ourselves is to use our phones and tablets in a reckless, excessive manner. And so there has to be some structuring done, and I'll give you a few examples. One of them is lectures, khatiras. There are every masjid and every scholar right now is going live on Facebook, on YouTube, and alhamdulillah, that's great. and that's something amazing to see. But at the same time, me as a person, one of the things I can do is I can select one or two, right? One or two scholars that I trust, that I find knowledgeable, right? And that can be whomever it is. Everybody's free to choose whom they wish to listen into them. And then I say that I've done my quota for the day. That's my lecture for the day. That's my khatara for the day, right? And shaitan will come through other means and say, no, you need to listen to more sometimes. And really what will happen is, instead of us listening, there's notifications and there's all those other things going on, we end up wasting our time on other things. And so selecting one source or two sources and really sticking to that. Similarly for our news, right? We're constantly being fed the news again and again. The death tolls of different countries. How many cases do we have now? Similarly with that, we can, it's good to be informed. We set a specific time to listen to the news. We pick a few sources. We stick to that, and then that's it. That's my news for the day. That's my lecture for the day. That's my news for the day. And halal entertainment, anything that's permissible to watch. Of course, Islam allows for halal entertainment. Anything that I feel, something that I feel that it'll help me refresh and keep me going. Some halal comedy or something of that sort. I watch that in a controlled, in a proportionate manner, and then I put my device away. And then what do I do with our time? What do we do with our time, right? Spend that time with our kids. Find different activities. Parents are now saying that I don't know what to do with my kids, right? We're bored because we've become so accustomed to going to our device every time that it's hard for us to sit together and do an activity. It all seems boring. But really, we have to kind of push ourselves to spend that physical time. And that's one of the primary reasons actually why many of us struggle with our salah, because we're away from a screen and we're not used to doing something that a screen is not involved in it, right? It's physical, it requires focus, we don't have that attention span, we find ourselves wandering around, and that's why we struggle with our salah. And so all of these things are interlinked. Our social relations with our family, for spouses, for husbands, for wives, in their relationship to one another. An excessive amount of tech usage can negatively harm your relationship. For children, it can negatively harm their education, their upbringing. For the entire family, we're all sitting together and we're on our phones, that can harm us as well. And then these are our goals for now, but in the long run is that distancing ourselves from the community. Because the Prophet ﷺ, many of the things that he encouraged us to do, right? The idea of attending a wedding, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said that it's one of the rights of the believer is that you respond to him or her when they invite you to their wedding. The idea of us going to a person's wedding, the idea of us visiting the sick person, the idea of us attending a funeral, attending a janazah, and there's great amounts of reward for it. The idea of going for the burial itself, right? All of these things, they are physical, communal acts that we are encouraged to do, and that's how a healthy community comes about at the communal level, and then at the family level as well. Spending time together, it helps us come together. It helps us solidify our relationships. So to conclude, we should be using this time to use our devices in a limited, controlled manner, and then we should set it aside, try to find other means with our family to really enjoy the physical human touch, enjoy the physical aspect of things. And even in our personal, like I said, our salah, even our Quran, right? You can have your Quran on your phone and that's fine, but maybe opting out and putting away my phone and picking up a physical mushaf, a physical copy of the Quran, just to give me that physical touch and take me away from that screen for a little bit. There's always necessity, there's always that level of usage, but we need to find the right balance between what we really need in terms of screen usage and what we kind of just are wasting our time, or just in excess we're consuming all of this content. So ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He allows us to use this time in a beneficial way, and ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He allows us to really value the human touch and really value the beauty of connecting with one another, the beauty of sitting with one another, the beauty of holding conversations, the beauty of reading from the Mus'haf, the beauty of standing in prayer. All of these things we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla that He allows us to gain the true spirit of these things during this difficult time. And ask Allah Azza wa Jalla that He protects us all, those that are struggling throughout the world. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He helps them and He takes us out of this situation soon. إنه هو السميع المجيب. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.